we're in a moment in the industry, everyone wants to talk about this, where it's like, well, opportunities are closing off. But they're only closing off if you are committed to doing things the traditional way. I think you have to be very facile.
If you listen to podcasts, especially film podcasts, today's guest needs no introduction. But I'm going to do it anyway. Paul Scheer hosts the OG of movie podcasts, a show that celebrates movie flops, misfires, and fiascos. It's called How Did This Get Made?
Hello, people of Earth, and welcome to How Did This Get Made? I am Paul, joined as always by Jason and June. How are you both?
Good, what's going on?
Very good.
How Did This Get Made started 15 years ago, which is an eternity in podcast time. He also has a second podcast called Unspooled, which delves into good movies, really good movies, which must be a nice change of pace for Paul. But his main jobs are as an actor, writer, and director. On TV, he's had major roles on Veep and The League, and he's created cult comedies like Human Giant and NTSF, SD, SUV. That's the real name of a real show that aired on Adult Swim. If you haven't seen it, you must. Last year, Paul added published author to his resume. He wrote a best-selling memoir called Joyful Recollections of Trauma. It's filled with funny stories about trying to break into showbiz, including some extremely awkward celebrity encounters. But it's most notable for Paul's unflinching recollections of his childhood on Long Island and the abuse he endured at the hands of his violent and volatile stepfather. And we need to warn you, my conversation with Paul gets into some heavy topics, including child abuse. Through it all, Paul Scheer's main escape was the movies. He is a diehard, you might even say obsessive film lover, and those obsessions go deep. My guest today is Paul Scheer. I'm your host, Ben Mankiewicz. This is Talking Pictures, a podcast about movies, about memories, and all the stuff that happens in between. Turner Classic Movies makes this podcast with the streaming service Max, where you can see some of the movies mentioned in this episode. Paul Scheer, thanks for being here, man. It's really nice to see you in person.
Can I just tell you, before we begin,
yeah.
This show, what a service it does, because I love this show. I love the guests on the show, and everything is so diverse. I took being on the show I really want to make sure that I deliver, because everybody you have these fantastic conversations. I love it. I love it all.
Well, you're a I don't know, pioneer, because of course there were people doing podcasts so early and you want to give them credit, but I don't know who they are. But you were on this early, right?
Yeah. I've been doing my podcast, How Did This Get Made, for 15 years, which it doesn't even seem like a long time. It just seems like an extension of what I was doing in a live theater environment. Like, I started off doing live comedy in New York, and it was like, oh yeah, we can do this. We'll do this podcast too. It felt the same way. Like, you're working in a black box in a way.
I want to talk mostly about movies, but I think that your book is the Joyful Recollections of Trauma.
Yeah.
It's very good. Congratulations. It's hard to write a book. How long did it take you?
It took me about 2.5 years off and on. And, and it was something where I really will say that the revision process was the most fun. Like, I love being in an edit. I love being in an edit. It's the best part of making anything.
Yeah.
So that's really where, I spent 2 months almost night and day really kind of putting it together. And this book is, it's not trauma dumping. It's a conversation that I would have with you. It's funny stories, but it's all kind of mixed in, kind of seen through the lens of just like having this, this abusive childhood and kind of getting out of that and how the reverberations of it.
Yeah. So your stepfather was physically abusive.
Yeah.
And which to you seemed normal, I guess, right?
I think
as a
yeah.
kid, right? That's what we
as
do.
a kid without the internet or anything like that, like VCRs even came in midstream. Like we'd rent VCRs for birthday parties. There wasn't that much access to find out like what's normal. Like, it's just normal, and it wasn't. And, as far as aggressive and violent as he was also incredibly gregarious and fun. And there'd be fun moments, like I say, it's...
Right, but that's the trick. If he was violent all the time, you'd have been just scared of him.
Right. And you just didn't know when it would turn. I say, I didn't...
And that makes you also think when he's nice that it's more likely that the reason he was not nice, the reason he was mean, he was violent because you had
I'd done something
you
wrong.
messed something up, right?
Right. And it's like, and you know, it's similar, I think, on some level of like dealing with an alcoholic parent or something like that. You
100%.
just don't know
Yeah, right.
what you're walking into.
All right, so I was just curious. So I would say one form of what. It's funny that you write about many forms of abuse that you got from your stepfather, and your mom is out of the marriage now, and she remarried to a lovely guy.
Yeah.
So that's, but during Monopoly, it's like a family game night, and you're playing Monopoly, and it's fun, and you realize he's landed on your property with a hotel, and you're like, oh, this is gonna be good.
Pay up! I'm gonna win this game. And he's like,
what does he do?
Think about what you're doing. And you know, as a kid, I'm like, okay, yeah, no.
Think about you owe me $575.
Yeah, I'm like looking at the thing. Maybe I read it wrong. Oh, yeah, no, it's $275. He's like, do you really want to do this? And in that moment, like, I know something has changed, but I don't know. I'm too young. Like, and that's the thing. It's like hindsight's amazing. Like, I can tell you, like, oh yes, here are all the warning signs. But as a kid, I'm just like, yeah, like I don't expect anything. And he's like, think about what you're doing. And I'm like, it's $275. And then boom, he just reaches across the table and starts to strangle me.
He's choking
me out. And I'm like, I can't catch my breath. I'm like, I don't, no, I won't charge you. And he just lets go and then picks up the dice and rolls, and it's like, and the game is back in action. It wasn't like the family game night didn't end. It was just, that was what it was. And then we finish playing Monopoly. He beats me or whatever, and
because you didn't have to pay any money.
Right,
That's
exactly. Yeah. And I'm never going to charge him again when he lands on my thing. Yeah. And that was game night, and everything was kind of tinged with like just kind of beating you down with, it just, you never could get away. But it wasn't like, oh, I'm being bad, I'm not being nice, I'm not, never apologies, never anything. It was just this weird world.
You write about escaping that, the manners you had of escaping it, and some of it was literally playing hide and go seek. You were great at it. You'd find these little places to hide. But do you think the abuse had anything to do with the way you fell in love with movies? Like, was there any escape?
Absolutely. There? For me, my escape from this world that we were living in was film and TV. They were my friends. I was an only child for the most part of my life, and I lived in a block where there were no kids. So I was constantly entertaining myself, and I would watch these movies, whether it was like cop movies. I love cop movies. And I'd act out my own cop. I'd be like this, 40-year-old hardened cop, and I
Did you give him a name?
Lance Hansen. Lance Hansen was this guy who, was like trying to quit smoking, had an ex-wife, and always being called on the case, always, eliminated from the force. And I'd just play these games out, and I'd make these giant movies of my own creation. And they would always pick up wherever I last left them off. But that was my thing. And video cameras were kind of new. And we'd rent a video camera, and I'd just tape these elaborate, I'd set the camera up, I'd act in front of it, I'd do all the parts. It was my own way of checking out in a way. Like, I could have that reality. And I think that in a weird way, and I may not even have drawn this line in the book, but that allowed me to almost feel like the world I was living in, where I was also playing a character, right? So it was like, I'm playing a character in everything. I'm like, I am this kid who's in this situation, so I got to figure it out. Like, it gave me actually some...
Right, how does this movie end?
Right. And it gave me some power, to be the lead character of a movie, even in that movie where I'm being abused, or like, how can I hide out? How can I win this? What's my third act moment? This is my, it's like, and I didn't know all those terms.
But it also makes you, whether you didn't even say this, but it makes you the hero of that story.
Right, 100%.
Right. Yeah, right.
And makes him, it makes some lines a little bit cleaner. And I feel like that play definitely is the reason why I got into improv, or why I loved it so much, because it's like, oh, I'm creating stuff on the spot like I was doing when I was a kid. So yeah, and to me it was, I lived with movies. While kids were on the school bus listening to like Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin, I was listening to like audio cassette tapes of movies that I had taped. I'm like listening to Running Scared, the Billy Crystal, Gregory Hines movie, in my ears, and like, so that was my thing, and I wanted to get into this world. I didn't know how to get into this world, but it was just, injecting everything. I think I saw every movie that came out in a year. I never went backwards. Fun, like, oddly enough, never really went backwards until later in life. But I just stayed I watched everything.
I wanted to start with what just struck me as so incredibly funny. was all the things you learned. Your love of movies leads you to Blockbuster, and
Yeah.
you think like, it don't get better than this. There's no better job than working at Blockbuster.
Because as a kid who grew up outside of anything in Hollywood, it was like, that is the closest I'm ever going to get to the entertainment industry. Like being in Blockbuster, I have control. I feel like it's a spot. And, video stores are pop. This is a place where working on a Friday night was actually like a blessing. It was like, I want to work on a Friday night there because I'm going to see everybody I know in a good way. And they're going to be psyched. Because
everybody's going to be in a good mood.
Yeah.
They're excited, right?
And it was, and I love that idea of a video store so much that I remember going with my dad to like a video store in Queens. My dad lived in Queens, and all the videos were behind in like almost like the way you would put rings and diamonds.
Touch them.
You couldn't touch them.
You got to get the number.
You got to write a number, and then they'll tell you if it was in stock or if it wasn't in stock.
And they always have like one copy of each.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah,
and you put your name down on the list, and it was like it was a big deal to even get the movie that you wanted. And I started building my own video store in my house, and I was renting out things to my teachers in school. Like, what do you got? I'm like, well, you want to see, whatever it was. I had everything. My walls were aligned. I had a bookcase that was just lined with VHS copies.
I had those kind of jobs, but I was almost always in delivery.
Okay.
Right. So I just loved that you would get like anybody calls, wants to talk to the manager.
Right.
What would you do?
Well, we would essentially pretend to be the manager or pass it off to somebody who wasn't the manager because we knew that, well, first of all, it's a video store. There's nothing going on here that needs to, there's no immediate attention, right? So you have people calling who are like, hey, can you actually, it's my daughter's birthday. Can you hold this thing? It was like either that or they were complaining about stuff because we were acting a fool in there. We treated this place like a clubhouse. It was a party place for me and my friends. We all were in high school. We loved movies. And we had jokes and we had inner things. I remember that you could put comments on people's accounts. And we would make very snarky comments about certain customers. If they were
a jerk, right?
If they were a jerk, you would let people know. So then when you were at the counter and you were ringing them up, you would see, oh, this person is,
it was mean to Sheila.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, right,
and then you could kind of give them, oh, we don't have that. Or you just play with them. And I guess there was some sort of update in the cash register system at one point, and those customer comments started printing out on the receipts. So there was, until we realized that people were going home with this person's breath stinks, this person's an asshole, fuck this person, his kid's weird, and then we got so many calls about that. What does this mean? And again, we would pretend to be the manager, and then we get on the phone and be like, okay, we'll talk to this person, we'll make sure it's we would do weird stuff too. We'd hide in the Dropbox. The Dropbox is where you didn't want to pull in, so you just drop a movie in the Dropbox and leave. And we'd hide in there and grab movies from people, and people come in freaked out, But it was a camaraderie there it was very corporate, but at the same time, it was before corporate really took over. It's like we were able to still play in this playground.
Time for a quick break. When we come back, Paul Scheer describes his worst celebrity encounter.
And there's a look across his face. I always like to say, it looked like a dog that kind of cocks his head. What? I don't understand what you want from me here. And the minute his head cocks, every pore on my body starts to sweat.
In addition to working at Blockbuster, Paul started doing improv during high school, eventually joining the Upright Citizens Brigade, which is now a pretty big deal. From there, he got the call to audition for his dream job, to work at Saturday Night Live. That audition ended up lasting several years, and it didn't go the way Paul hoped. I love failure.
Sure.
I'm sure you do too.
Yeah.
You
learn the most.
Podcast about failure, right? And movies that didn't work. So you wanted to be on Saturday Night Live. That was your goal, right? That was your...
I think it felt like that was something that it went from being something that I grew up watching and being like, that if you're a comedian, you go on Saturday Night Live. Everybody I love. Bill Murray, Eddie Murphy, Steve Martin hosted a bunch. It just felt like SNL was that was the place that you had to go through. Yeah, I wanted to be on Saturday Night Live really bad. And then that goes away, right? Because then it's sort of like, I don't even know how that's even possible. I was at the UCB, which is the Upright Citizens Brigade, and Second City and Groundlings were the gateway to SNL. and I wasn't in either one. I was in UCB, which was becoming this very cool thing in New York, but it was not established. It was not established as cool. And then as the buzz started building around it, one year, like Lorne Michaels is like, put a showcase on for us, or, we're going to see what you got. So we all kind of took our best material to perform in front of like Lorne Michaels. And
others too, just Lorne?
It was Lorne, the producers. I want to say like writers were there. It was like
there were some people there.
Yeah, we held like 20 seats and they filled the thing and then we packed it around them, like to make sure that we had the best laughers to show that we were good. And I didn't think anything of it. It was like, okay, great, SNL thing. But it was a freedom and we all had fun with it. It was like no pressure because it was unexpected. It was like, we're doing a showcase for Lorne Michaels. Okay, great.
Yeah.
And I thought it went great. I did the sketch that I've done and then no one heard anything. It was like, okay, fine, that was it. But it was fun. We got to audition for Lorne Michaels. And then I get a call. Lorne Michaels wanted to come in. And I was like, oh my gosh, I bet you they called everybody. And they didn't call everybody. They called only me.
So you go to 30 Rock.
And I was like, oh my God. And I was like, I'm going to go to 30 Rock and, I get there and I'm ready to, do my stuff. And I prepared my things and I didn't even know how to prepare. And because no one else got it, I didn't ask anybody. So I'm just kind of nervously waiting.
Because you didn't want to.
I didn't want to I didn't want to rub it in anyone's face.
Right.
Like I should have asked for advice. And the one thing I feel like I've learned more and more is like, talk to people, ask people, don't ever do things in a vacuum. I did that in a vacuum, but I wrote my pieces and had my impressions and I had my characters. And, and you get there at 3. And I'm like, all right, I've auditioned a handful of times so far. I'm sure that'll be fine. And hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours start to pass. And it's like, and I'm just going stir crazy. I'm in a dressing room that's not mine. It's clearly some other cast member's dressing room, and I'm just in I'm in a little corral and I don't know what to do. I'm like just walking, pacing. I turn on the TV. Then I realize that the TV is a live feed to SNL main stage and I can actually watch people auditioning on stage. And I quickly turn it off like, oh, I'm not supposed to see that.
Right.
But then I turn it back on. I'm like, maybe I should see it. I'm like, no, I can't. Like I'm wrestling it. So you're in this like weird zone of like, what do I do? And I need to get some air. And I open the door and who's getting air as well is Kevin Hart. So Kevin Hart, who is nobody at that point, and we're just two people like that have been sitting in a room for 5 hours, like waiting for our chance to go. And he's lovely. And we chat and, he goes out there and then I finally go out there and I do my stuff. I meet Lorne Michaels, which is kind of like meeting, this fictional figure. He's played such a large part in my life, since I was a kid, but meet him was almost more exciting because he is SNL. He is everybody, and he's so nice. They wire you up. They put you on that 8H stage where the host does the monologue, and all of a sudden you see your name and the Saturday Night Live logo, and they count you down like 3, 2, 1, and then boom, it's on you, and every camera is on. People are taping you. They're hidden in the back in the darkness. And you're on the stage and you also see yourself in all these monitors, which I was not expecting, right? So I'm like, and I'm just trying to do my thing. And I have a great time and I do it and I leave and I'm like, all right, well, that was it. I had my experience and I didn't get it. But then the next year, okay, they want you to do this again. And went through different
calls you? How do you find out?
I had a manager and they say they want to see you. This time they want to see you do improv.
Okay.
And I'm like, okay, great. And then, that goes by. And then the next year.
So it's 2 straight years you've
had
an opportunity to audition and didn't get it.
And then next year is another, like come back in, great, and do it again. So you're like, so then it's getting by rote. And it's like, oh, they must like something. I'm not going to change anything, but what do they like? I don't know.
Obviously they didn't think, oh, he doesn't have it.
Right. It's like I didn't know what they were looking for. And then the final time they called me in was it was on my birthday, and they were like,
"This is the 3rd year.
This is the 4th actually, because they did one in the middle that was like I think I auditioned at like some sort of stand-up comedy club again, just 3 characters, and and so the 4th year it was like, come and meet Lorne. I was like, oh okay, and
how old are you?
I'm probably mid-20s at this point, and I go in. Again, in the middle of the afternoon. And I remember his assistant's like, he's running 6 hours behind. And I'm like, oh, 6 hours? That's a long time. I was like, let me, I'll go home. I live on 50th and 8th. I'll go home. And they're like, no, he'd like you to stay in the building. So then it's like killing 6 hours and I'm hanging out with producers and I'm watching them put the show together. And it's really amazing. Like I'm in the mix. And I'm like, this is this is awesome. Like I'm getting to watch a show and I feel like I'm being catered to in a way that's different than the other years. It's not like we don't want you to audition. We just want to talk to you. What do you think about this sketch? What do you think about this? They're asking me a lot of questions. It's hours and hours. And I guess in my naive sense, I'm not realizing I'm doing an interview here. I'm like, I'm just hanging out. I'm hanging out to eat more. I finally get into his office and I'm like, all right, he'll see you. But then I realized it wasn't even his office. It was an inner office of, I was still in the outer office of his sanctum. So then I finally get brought in and he's sitting there across from me and we have this like conversation.
So you're not auditioning now. He's seen you enough.
That we're just talking.
Right.
And he's asking me, and I remember he said to me, he's like, what's your trajectory? What's your career trajectory? How did you get from where you were to right here, right now? Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh boy, I'm trying to explain what I'm doing, but I'm also like trying to play up that I have had some success at this point, but I'm trying to be like, but I would love to be here. And, and he's telling me these stories. And the one thing I was told, it's like, whatever, don't. If he asks you, if you have any questions, say no. Worst advice I could possibly ever have gotten.
Can't imagine anybody giving you that.
Right. So I was like, okay, got it. So he goes, you have any questions, after this long interview? And I go, nope. He goes, really? 30 years in TV and you don't have a single question? And I was like, yes, I do. I could keep you here all night. He's like, okay, well, and then he goes, well, I hear it's your birthday. Happy birthday. He's like, would you want to come back tomorrow? Watch a show? Go to the party? And I was like, yeah, hell yeah, right? So now I think it's gone. Yeah, I think it's gone good. And I have friends in that room. Like Amy Poehler's on the show at this point. Tina Fey is there, and Tina's very nice to me, and Amy's wonderful to me. And so I go back. Now I'm at the show, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is it. They've brought me in. I'm in the writer's room. I'm talking to everybody. One of the producers, like, come in my limo after the show. We're gonna go to the party. I'm like, great. Go to the party and walking around. Everyone's coming up to me like, congratulations, this is amazing. This is so great. Congratulations. I'm like, oh, exciting. And then one of the producers like comes up to me in the middle of the party. And I feel like really good. And he's like, hey, you didn't get the job. And I go, oh, I'm sorry, what? And he's like, yeah, you didn't get it. And he goes, they did. And kind of points me over to like where the table is. And there's Lauren talking to another person who's also been running the gauntlet with me this entire time. And he's just having like drinks with this person. Like that person's hired. And I never could he have been further away from me, even though he was like 20 feet away. And I was like, and I remember the producer going, I'm like, but stay here. You want a drink? We'll buy whatever drinks you want. Johnny Walker Blue, I'll buy it for you. And I was like, oh, and I made this decision in that moment where I was like, fuck it. I'm going to stay. I'm going to stay. I didn't get the job, but I'm not going to go with my tail between my legs. I'm going to stay here at this party. And I did. And for better or for worse, I felt like I took ownership of that moment. I was like, everything inside me was dying. I was like, I didn't get the show. I see who got the show. I'm rejected in the middle of this party. I feel like absolute shit. But I stayed and I saved face on some level. And I'm glad that I did that because it actually it burnt, it stunk, but I got over it, I think, a little bit quicker.
Why did they tell you at the party? What was that about?
No idea. No idea.
That's effed up.
And I also have no idea what I could have done right or wrong. Or just like, we couldn't figure, I think that to that show's benefit, he is looking at it as a full piece. And everyone has to fit into a piece. And everyone is a piece that fits into a larger puzzle. And I feel like, and you might be right for the show, but not right now for the show. And that's why you have like Kevin Hart and Jim Carrey not getting the show. It's like it doesn't mean anything about talent. There's so many great people who did one season on that show or didn't hit on that show, and it's alchemy in some way.
Yeah, but to your credit, going 0 for 4 on Saturday Night Live and not having that seemingly in any way slow you down or discourage you. Well, I'm not saying you weren't bummed out.
No, but what was kind of great about it was there was this moment where it was like, and I think it was the UCB thing. It was like, I need to do my own thing. I have to figure out, like, I can't be waiting for somebody to let me in the door. And so like the first time I got rejected, the second time I got rejected, then I started doing other projects. I was developing projects, working on things, trying out different things. It's like when you bet on yourself, at least you go down and it's like, well, I had some control over it. And I think that's the takeaway that, You know, you can't wait for somebody to give something to you. You have to just go and grab it.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, we're in a moment in the industry, everyone wants to talk about this, where it's like, well, opportunities are closing off. But they're only closing off if you are committed to doing things the traditional way. I think you have to be very facile. And I think comedians can be facile. And to your point, like, we're doing podcasts. We're doing something that maybe is streaming. We're doing a doc. Or, you know, it's, to me, it's like we have so many areas to create. And if you just try to go in this one path, you might find yourself again and again bumping up against a wall. But there's so many more opportunities.
Right.
Talking to Phil Lord about this, great director, and, you know, been behind some of his stuff. And he said, you know, gone are the days, or maybe there's a handful of people that will be the best at directing, the best at writing. But it's so much better to be like a 6 or 7 out of 10 on 5 things than a 10 on one thing. And I think that's kind of, you know, you open up more doors that way.
I wonder if my being 9 years older than you, and always there was a moment from I don't have an agent now, but when I did, and there was this sort of sense of, okay, but let's refine that. Like, what are you? They didn't want you to be pretty good at 6 things. They wanted you to be great at one thing.
And you're always going to run up against this obstacle, which is people want to put you in a box, and it's easy to get cast when you're in a box, right? Because or to get in a thing, but your career will last longer when you kind of fight against the box. You know, like I was doing The League. And I was like, well, I want to do
fantasy football show on FX.
Yes, which is all about, you know, it was like these guys who played in a fantasy league together. And we did that for 7 years. But I knew immediately, like, oh, I'm doing this character. I need to do something different. So that's when I did this show called NTSF SDSUV, which was more of a parody of like Jack Bauer and Michael Bay and those kind of things.
Can't let you gloss over that without pointing out.
Yes.
It is the funniest title in the history of titles. Just tell people what it...
So I did a show that was kind of paying homage to the NCIS, the CSIs. And so it was called NTSF SDSUV : and it was National Terrorism Strike Force San Diego Sport Utility Vehicle. That was the title. And it was impossible to tell people to find it because it was like, oh, wait, what is it? I said, just type in a bunch of consonants and you'll get it. But it was, and that was, for me, it was like, oh, I just want to have fun in this thing, but I want to do something different. And, you know, and so I think what you have to do is create those opportunities for yourself. And then people go, oh, I like your thing. And then you're like, oh yeah, it would be so much easier if somebody else has cast me in it or somebody else gave me this opportunity. But when you create your own, you got a lot more freedom.
And even big stars are worried about this very thing. I mean, you know, it's relevant that Robert Redford directed his first movie in 1980. It's Ordinary People.
Right.
And his second, and he wins the Best Director Oscar. And it wins Best Picture. And then 8 years later, he does his second movie, Milagro Beanfield War, right? I mean, he was in, and he had a zillion opportunities. He's Robert Redford. Yeah, he's meticulous about the choices he makes. But it goes back to his acting days and this sense of, I think I'm a serious actor. I know I'm incredibly handsome. I know I look like this. I don't want to be just this. And so he was super careful because he was going to get typecast just because there were, so he waited. He kept waiting. He always waited, acting or directing.
And I mean, that's Warren Beatty to a certain extent too. Like Warren Beatty's choices. I mean, I don't know how far away, but I know that he was very meticulous.
But he's not good looking, Warren Beatty. That's right. Yeah. It's not a handsome man.
And it's really interesting. I just found this movie that I never had seen before, never even heard of. And I believe it's called like $, right? Or it's
just the $.
It's just the $, and it's Warren Beatty and Goldie Hawn and Gert Frobe, from Goldfinger.
Right.
And I was like, oh wow! And Quincy Jones does the music for it, and it's like, you know, and I'm watching. I'm like, oh, this is so interesting, like because there are the big movies that you hear of, you know, it's like Heaven Can Wait and then Shampoo, and like I love finding those other weird ones that are like kind of slapped in there and just kind of put in this, you know, zone.
$870,000. It ain't possible. How? What do we tell Vegas?
Whatever we tell them, they're not going to believe it.
What do we do?
Start running.
If you've ever been to a live show of How Did This Get Made, you know Paul is famous for his celebrity encounters. He wrote about them in his book. There was one story I had to ask him about, his incredibly uncomfortable experience with Robert Downey Jr. The book is Joyful Recollections of Trauma. It's a great showbiz story, and it's a great family story and human story. And what do you call it? A memoir? Is it?
Yeah,
I guess.
it's a memoir in a sense. It definitely details a part of my life, and I talk about these moments where I've had these really amazing interactions and sometimes awkward ones.
I love your celebrity encounters because they're so painfully awkward and therefore human. And I have had many of those before I figured out how to do it. But I still don't really know.
There's some tricks, but they're hard. And I often put my foot in my mouth, and not even like I say something inappropriate. I just walk away regretting that I ever said anything.
Well, tell the Robert Downey Jr. story. It's so great.
So meeting Robert Downey Jr. was something that was not expected because I was at Comic-Con and I had hosted this big panel for the TV show Lost, and because of that,
you're already an established success at this point.
Yeah, I definitely have a little bit of cachet, like enough that. Right, like I'm doing
the
this.
Lost people wanted you to host their
Q&A
at Comic-Con. Yeah.
So I have this badge, and the whole thing in Comic-Con is you have this badge, and it allows you access that not other people can't get to. So that allows me access into this giant green room, and the giant green room is where all the Marvel stars are assembling for their yearly presentation at Comic-Con. Now I brought my wife to Comic-Con, and my wife, who does not like things of sci-fi or like this is her hell and her nightmare, so I'm like, I'm gonna bring her to Comic-Con. I'll bring her in the best way. We'll go to this green room and she'll feel like we're in a good zone. And so we walk into this green room and there everybody is. And no one's saying anything to us. We got the right badges, we're just mingling. And my wife is, an actress, and so
she's your co-host on the podcast.
Yes, exactly.
How this get made.
So we are not doing anything weird. We're not going around taking pictures. We're just I'm like, this is the best way to see it. We'll go down, we'll do the whole thing. Now, this is where it kind of gets a little bit interesting. I have been working on this movie, a classic movie called Piranha 3D.
Sure. Yeah.
Alex Aja directed this movie that is a lot of fun if you like 3D fish and blood.
But Piranha 3D didn't try to do anything that it isn't.
No, that's why it's kind of great. Like Alex Aja got what he was doing, and when we would go to set every day, I'd be riding this boat to set, and there was a guy, one of the producers on the movie, and he'd always be talking about Robert Downey Jr. And he'd call him RDJ. He's like, oh man, me and RDJ, this is the best. RDJ showed me, something from Sherlock Holmes. And I was like, cut that scene. He's like, you're right, we'll do it. And it's like, look, you're surrounded by a lot of people in this business who talk a lot of bullshit, I guess, and so I'm like, I don't know. I couldn't quite figure out this guy. I was like, is he right? Is he wrong? I can't, but his specifics were so spot on. And then he started calling out people that I knew, people like Stuart Cornfeld, amazing producer. Stuart Cornfeld worked with Ben Stiller, produced The Elephant Man, worked at Brooks Films. I was like, wow, Stuart Cornfeld's a deep pull. If you know Stuart, maybe he does know Robert Downey Jr. So we, every day we're talking, he's telling me stories about doing karate with Robert Downey Jr., talking about, going on set, talking about Iron Man, talking about the new Iron Man. I'm like, and he goes, what are you doing this weekend? I said, well, I'm going to Comic-Con. He goes, oh, so is Robert. So is RDJ. If you see him, tell him I say hi. Now, the rational sense of me, I was like, well, yeah, I'm not going to see him, and also I'll never do that. I'm not going to talk to this guy, right? So now we are in this green room. Robert Downey Jr. is there, and they go, hey, everybody, Iron Man 2 panel, let's go. And they start pulling everybody out to the elevator to go down to Hall H, the biggest hall in San Diego Comic-Con. And my wife and I are walking out, and there's like a traffic, where we're caught, and all of a sudden I am mere inches away from Robert Downey Jr. And my wife, because she was stalling because she didn't want to go to Comic-Con, made me go get some Mexican food there. So we had about a couple margaritas. So I feel like I'm looser than I would normally be. And so here he is, Robert Downey Jr. And I go, hey, RDJ, and
did you use the initials?
I used RDJ, which I've never used RDJ. I don't think anyone uses RDJ, right?
I'd never heard it. I'd never heard it until I read your book, ever.
And so now I say RDJ, and he turns and he looks at me. I'm like, hey, I'm like way too friendly. And I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a margarita. Maybe I'm trying to show my wife a good time. And I go, I'm friends with, and I won't say the guy's name. I'm like, I'm friends with this guy. And there's a look across his face. I always like say like it looked like a dog that like kind of cocks his head. Like what? I don't understand what you want from me here. And the minute his head cocks, every pore on my body starts to sweat. Like I'm in that moment. I'm like, oh no, I've made a terrible mistake. I don't know what to do. And at this point, my wife, who's been holding my hand, like lets go of my hand. Like she jettisons off like a parachute. She's like, pfft, and my wife just disappears. Like my wife fades into the background. Now, I will say, my wife was in Zodiac with Robert Downey Jr. Before this. So she also had a reason
She
to
actually
connect.
has some standing.
Yes,
That's right.
she could go there and be, oh yeah. And so now I'm like, oh, I don't know what to do. So I'm trying to, I go, I'm friends with him, and I start to label like list all these things. He's got these tattoos. He does this. He's this, and it's not working. And I don't know why I'm sticking to it. But I'm still like trying to convince him that I know somebody. Right? It doesn't make a difference. Like now it's like he doesn't want to know me, but I'm like we have a connection. And at this point, as I'm flustered and trying, his two security guards kind of turn. And these men are giant. I always remember their necks were wider than my calf. Like they're just big men. And they're looking at me. And Robert Downey says to me, he's like, sorry, man, I don't know who you're talking about. And I go, oh, right. Okay. Well, I now I don't know what to do. I'm still trying to save face. My wife's over. We're not moving. Nothing's happening. And I go, I must have had you confused with somebody else. It's the most, first of all, Robert Downey Jr., like, who did I have him confused with? Like, Robert Downey Sr.? I'm like, and I'm like, and I don't know what to do. And he's like, what? And I was like, yeah, I'm confused. I was, I thought you were somebody else. And then thank God the elevator dings. Everyone gets in, and I stay frozen. I'm like, everyone go by me. Like I'm like Homer Simpson. Like I'm just trying to just go into the bushes because I can't be on that elevator with him again.
You knew not to get on the elevator.
I knew that. I knew that.
Yeah.
And he goes on, and my wife just looks at me. She's like, what were you thinking? And I go, I don't know. Cut to years later. I am working in Atlanta. I'm doing this movie. And my friends have come to the set of the Avengers. They're shooting, the Russo brothers are shooting
You're not doing the Avengers, you're doing another movie.
I'm doing another movie, so they come and visit set. And I go and visit set, and I meet up with Chris Pratt, who I know, and Karen Gillan, who has been on my show, and we're having a great time. We're all joking around. And they come on to this set, and we go onto this set, and it's a giant scene. Like all the characters are there. And I'm on set. I'm literally on like this giant set, this elevated set of like a meteor, and I'm walking around, and then here comes Robert Downey Jr. And I swear to God, when he saw me, I activated some memory for him because he called over both of his guys and they came right to him, and he was pointing at me. And then I looked back and I was like, I gotta go. I gotta get out of here. And I just said, and my friend's like, wait, you don't want to go? I was like, I gotta leave. I took off. I was like, I know I activated a memory. And I fully believe that in Iron Man 2 or 3, whenever he meets Guy Pearce, I feel like that interaction with Guy Pearce in the beginning in the snow is my interaction. He's like, well, let's base it on this.
Wow. Hey, Tony. Aldrich Killian. I'm a big fan of your work.
My work?
Who is it? He means me.
Well, of course, but Miss Hanson, my organization's been tracking your research since year 2 of MIT.
Yeah, we're full. Oh, wow, we made it. Made the cut.
After a quick break, Paul Scheer gives us his answers to the Super 8, including the one time he lined up at 6 a.m. just to see a trailer.
The energy of that theater was electric.
We're back. Time for the Super 8, where our guests answer a series of questions about movies they've watched, movies they've loved, and movies they'll never forget. I doubt I'll ever have a guest come in as prepared as Paul Scheer. All right, let me give you the Super 8. You ready for this?
I am. Very much so.
Most memorable movie watching experience.
Okay. I hope this is not a cheat, but I think this is really...
There are no cheats.
Okay. I live by the Ziegfeld Theater in New York City. Classic, beautiful theater.
As an adult, right?
As an adult, yes. And there was this whole thing when The Phantom Menace came out, the new Star Wars. You could go watch the trailer. It was going to be attached to Meet Joe Black, a Brad Pitt movie. And the line to get into Meet Joe Black to watch the trailer, because this is not when it's not dropping on the internet. So I lined up at 6 a.m. to be one of the first people to see the Phantom Menace trailer. So we are in this theater at like 10 a.m. on a Friday morning, all Star Wars fans. No one there sees Joe Black. And you know, that Lucasfilm title goes on. And, you know, as somebody who grew up with Star Wars, it was this moment where the energy of that theater was electric. And it was, and we were, and you know, I rewatched that trailer recently, and you see it's all these images. What could it be? It looks awesome. It really is amazing. And that energy, I've never felt a whole theater on the same page for 90 seconds. And what they did was they said they didn't want people to leave. So they said, hey, so after Meet Joe Black, we'll play the trailer again. So you have a bunch of people watching that trailer, like, yeah, and then Meet Joe Black, which I remember, and I only really saw it in that one time. I didn't really enjoy it. Everyone just sitting silently, like we're just politely.
Isn't it sad, Meet Joe Black?
Yes, and it's like 2.5 hours, and you know, we were all just sitting there, and then it was like the credits roll, and it was like, and then everyone just boom. But that communal experience of an audience, like like that, like the waves of like, it's just being there, and I think that's like, that's the thing, you know, talking about like how do you get kids into movies? Like or how do I find those things? Like putting them in that crowded theater, finding those moments of just capturing that, like letting them feel like they're a part of something, that becomes special.
Movie you loved in high school?
So I was thinking about this a lot. I think the movie that I found to talk to me was The Cable Guy. Ben Stiller directed, Judd Apatow written, Jim Carrey doing not what Jim Carrey, like it's not what he's doing. And Matthew Broderick, who I love from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. That movie, Cable Guy, spoke to a sensibility that it was like it scratched an itch I didn't know I had. And everything about it, the medieval times, it just felt to me like I hadn't seen anything this weird, and people hated it.
Yeah, I know. I remember people hating it, and I didn't hate it. And then having rewatched it sometime in the last 5 or 6 years, it's really good.
It's really funny.
Really funny, yeah.
Comedy sometimes captures a vibe that's going on in the comedy scene, and it just came out right before. People just didn't want to see that version of Jim Carrey, but them fighting at medieval times, kind of parodying the old Star Trek, it scratched every itch of what I wanted. So my friends and I would quote that all the time.
Welcome to medieval times. I'll be your serving wench, Melinda. Might I fetch you something from the barkeep?
Dost have thou a mug of ale for me and me mate? He has been pitched in battle for a fortnight, and has a king's thirst for the frosty brew, thus thou might have for thus.
I'll be right back, my lord.
My thanks to ye, fair wench.
Movie you'd show someone you were interested in. You know,
this was always a big thing for me, because
what if they don't like it?
What if they don't like it? And you also want to use it as a calling card to yourself. Like, I always believe that you don't really know anybody that you're dating until a year has passed, because you can see them through the highs and the lows, and you get a more balanced portrait. So I would always show people, girls I was dating, Galaxy Quest, because I had a theory on it. I am into nerdy things. Absolutely. I love Star Trek. I love sci-fi, 100%. But I was like, you don't need to be into Star Trek to enjoy this movie. And I was like, but if you can walk that line with me, if you can agree that this movie that you probably would never have watched by yourself is good, and you got Sigourney Weaver, who's amazing in it, and you have all these and it's an emotional movie, there are moments to cry in it, everything. And that was my go-to movie of like, no one's heard of it, or I felt like a lot of girls I dated didn't heard of it, and they showed it to them, and they would walk out, and I feel like they got to see a little bit of me. Okay, he likes comedy. He also has a little nerdy side, but they would bond with that nerdy side a little bit. Like, oh, I kind of liked it too. So maybe I'll be open to this, or maybe I'll lean in a little bit. So that was always a good litmus test to see if they could roll with me as far as what I'd like.
You were going to reboot it, right, as a TV show?
I was. I worked on that for a long time, and that was a dream come true. And I had pitched it and worked on it. I think the thing I learned with that was IP is a scary, dangerous thing. It's because so many people have ownership of why they like it, and I would talk to people. When I pitched it, I was working with Gran Villa, who does Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad, and we really saw eye to eye on what was going to be interesting about it, which was I don't like putting a fish back into water. Like, yeah, it was a fish out of water, you know, and so it's like, or I guess maybe taking him back out again. Like, you have to figure out a way to expand it. You know, when Galaxy Quest came out, Comic-Con was not popular. It wasn't cool. I went to Star Trek conventions when I was a kid. I would go there all the time. Saw Leonard Nimoy, I saw Walter Koenig, saw all these guys. I loved it. But when we were talking about doing this, Comic-Con was huge. There was people were lined up to see Twilight. Like, and I was like, well, how can we do this interestingly? And I was like, what if we create a character like a J.J. Abrams type who's rebooting the Galaxy Quest TV show. And the first movie really was about actors who have been left behind and they were so desperate for another chance. And I was kind of approaching it from the idea of A-list stars who don't even care. They're just like, I need to get into this. And they haven't cared. And they're just, you know, and then kind of forcing them to care. So it's like, it's the same machination. Like, can you pull them in and make them work together, something that they don't want to do because they're so disaffected. And you take away all their publicists and their phones, and then they have to kind of, you know, the guys like The Rock.
Very nice original way of doing it.
You know, I thought, and then they can pull in different people, and they had like a through line that kind of connected the other one. But at the end of the day, you know, some people would be like, we just want Tim Allen in there. And I'm like, oh yeah, he'll get in there. But it's like, it's got to be, you know, and so the long story short was when we handed it in, everyone at Amazon got fired. And then they're like, we got to wait. And then they had a new person at Amazon. They're like, well, they're not going to read that anymore. And then we're like, we'll pitch it to somebody else. And then all my people at Paramount got fired. And then Melissa Bernstein went off to become an independent producer. So then I lost every aspect to it. And I've heard different things every now and then. You'll see, oh, well, Simon Pegg was working on it. Then he kind of dropped out of it. And then this amazing writer from Veep, she got on board. And then she dropped. I think you got to please a lot of people in an IP thing, and it's hard to do.
Give me a movie your mom loved.
All right. So I asked her because I knew this question was coming, and I was like, I want to see what she is going to say. Because my answer was going to be Psycho 4, A New Beginning, which was a movie that my mom seemed to love watching. Psycho 4. Great performances there. I went back and rewatched it. Not bad.
When was Psycho 4?
Psycho 4 was Anthony Perkins Returns.
The last one
Yes, the last one he did, and it was as if none existed after one. So it was like he's out of a mental institution.
Like a sequel, okay.
And he's calling a call-in talk show to talk about mental illness. And through his, and he tells how he grew up with his mom. And so as a kid, it was like a prequel, but also a sequel.
It's a super interesting way of doing it.
Yeah.
And I like it when sequels like ignore the movies that you've seen have
right, and they're like
never mind.
Yeah. So they did that. And so my mom loved that movie. But I asked her last night, I said, what's your favorite movie? And she's like, Ghost. Yeah. Which, I thought, okay, it was great. But I never heard her talk about Ghost. And I wondered if, her husband has passed away. And I wonder if, it's interesting how when things change in your life, you start to be like, oh, I look to that. I want that. I want that in my life. But my mom was a person who I always had a hard time pinning down where she fell. But she would always be coming home with horror movies, Phantasm, Flowers in the Attic. And I was like, I would never watch movies with her because it was like too scary. I was like, no, I can't do this. But she loved horror. Maybe it's a reflection of the world that we were both living in during a period of time too,
Oh, yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Your mom sounds like a very interesting person. Mm-hmm. That's what, and your dad too. Okay, movie your dad loved.
Young Frankenstein. Yeah. That was something that I was able to kind of line up. My dad really created my sense of humor in the sense of he showed me these things that I loved Young Frankenstein. I loved Blazing Saddles. And, that was, he definitely cultivated that. Brought me to my first improv show, showed me, we tape SNL every Saturday night and watch it Sunday morning. That was to me, it was just like an important bonding process.
The first time that we watched SNL on Hulu, now you can, whatever, it's right, as soon as you watch it on Sunday, my daughter started saying, oh, this is our tradition. On Sundays we watch.
I love that.
And I was like, oh, this is so nice. Like, this is so great.
It's when you find those little moments, it's like I watch my kids fall off the couch watching Happy Gilmore. Yeah. And I was like, wow. And it's like, and now they like, let's watch it again. Like when you can give them something like that, where you feel like you're cool, like you've matched up with what they think is cool, or you've surprised them, and you get this like little thing. And now my son's always like, Dad gets to pick the movies because Dad knows the funny movies, which has now given me a tremendous amount of pressure. So I'm like,
but that's a huge ego boost.
yeah,
though, too.
100%.
That feels really
100%.
good. Yeah. So okay, for this one, you imagine you're a thief.
Yes.
Right? And there's a vast movie warehouse like at the end of Indiana Jones, but it's all movie props. Every prop in every movie. What do you steal?
So I thought about this, and I'll just give you my reasoning for a couple things. What I really want to steal is something that I could have displayed in my house without it being too obtuse, right? Like, so it's like, all right, well, yes, would I want Axel Foley's jacket? Sure, but it would be in a closet. Would I want the DeLorean from Back to the Future? Sure, but what am I going to do with that? Like, so I really thought about it, and I was like, what could be a fun thing that I could have? And I realized that last night, I want the smashed alarm clock from Groundhog Day.
Oh, that's great. That's good.
And it could just sit there, and I was like, I would love that because it's a great, small little thing, and it's a beautiful movie, and I love it so much, and I just love that. Like I love having it out, and people wouldn't know exactly what it was.
I cry a lot, cry easily. What makes you cry without fail? Movie that makes you cry without fail?
I would say it's Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is a movie that when you get to that moment when they separate, it gets me. There's a couple of moments like the "I Like Me" speech that John Candy gives. Yeah. Whoa, that's a movie that is joke, and it's like I love John Hughes. I grew up with John Hughes, but that ability to go back and forth, and when I cry at the end just that he had invited him home and they're walking in the street.
I can't. So my daughter, who's again, so we were just watching that. I don't know, 4 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, something like that, and she does the thing that she goes, "Are you crying?" I'm like, "Of course."
Yeah.
Why aren't you crying? Like,
it's this beautiful. Yeah. It's a beautiful thing because it's like and I think I find a lot of that, like that beauty.
The way
in
he's
like,
so proper with his wife. It's Kathy Baker, is that right? Playing his wife, I think.
I forget her name.
But he's like, but anyway, he's like, he calls her Mrs. whatever.
Yeah, right.
Like, and he's so polite and he's so grateful. He's so grateful.
And it's just, you see so much. And that's, again, talking about John Candy, you see so much on his face. Like he does so much there. I read a great thing about it because I was doing research on it at one point because I was just like, I wanted to know. And John Hughes is very frustrated with Steve Martin, apparently, in that train sequence. So it's like they separate at the train sequence at the end. He gets John Candy's like, I'll stay here. And Steve Martin's like, I'll go and I'm going to go home. And it's on this train sequence that Steve Martin like puts the whole movie together.
Right, yeah.
And he's like, John Hughes like, I can't get this emotion from Steve Martin. I can't crack Steve Martin. And he realized that Steve Martin would run his lines as they were kind of running the train backwards and forwards. And he just kept the camera rolling on him. And it's a beautiful scene. And it's really great from a directing point of view that he just captures Steve Martin like rehearsing and thinking.
Right.
And it fills the movie in so perfectly. And it's everything coming together. But that is it's an interesting moment as a director to be like, oh, how do I get this?
I didn't know that about that scene until Ryan Reynolds came on TCM.
Oh,
and he picked the two movies he picked were Planes, Trains, and Automobiles and Grosse Pointe Blank.
Oh, that's great, yeah.
And he has the exact same reaction to that.
It's such a beautiful, beautiful scene. I really love it.
Movie that makes you laugh without fail.
Midnight Run. Midnight Run to me is, I love Martin Brest, but Midnight Run to me, I watch that movie. Every single person in that movie scores. It's De Niro doing, again, Grodin and De Niro together are magical. Dennis Farina is one of my favorite performances.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
It's so, every line out of his mouth.
Philip Baker Hall.
Oh, God. It's just Yaphet Kotto and all these people didn't know.
And Joey Pants.
Joey Pants, yeah. It's like.
And Jerry,
Yeah, Jerry, the guy goes up for the donuts. Like, get some donuts. Like, that whole cast is such a great, fun movie. And John Ashton, when I saw John Ashton in Beverly Hills Cop 4, I was like, where has this guy been too? Because it's sort of like, he is a great character actor, he's so funny. And that movie is just so confidently full of jokes. Why aren't you popular with the Chicago Police Department? And it's
93 bottles of beer. Oh,
yeah.
Well, why are you so unpopular with the Chicago Police Department? Yeah. I'm a white collar criminal.
You look beautiful.
You don't look much like a criminal.
A white collar criminal.
Jason, go upstairs now.
You're the best. Thanks, Paul, for all this.
This is absolutely a pleasure. And like I said, I love your podcast. I love this podcast, and lovely to be here.
I can talk about Midnight Run for hours. It's easily one of my favorites. But you know what I haven't seen in a long time? Like 57 years? Psycho 4, The Beginning. I promise I'm going to hunt that one down. Along with Dollars, the 1971 Warren Beatty movie that Paul mentioned. Early 70s heist films are never a mistake. That's our show. Thanks for listening. You can find many of the movies we talked about on the streaming service Max. We made a list for you. It's in our show notes. James Kim produces and edits Talking Pictures. The show is booked by Noea Murphy, Susan Bisak, and Missy Burns-Halpern. Glenn Matullo mixes each episode. Production support from Phil Richards, Yaakov Friedman, Liz Winter, Nicole Hill, and Cameron Kell. Angela Carone is our executive producer. Special thanks to Michael Gluckstad, Allison Cohen, and Kenya Reyes from the Max Podcast team. I'm Ben Mankiewicz. See you next time.